From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the MarTech Podcast, a Ben J. Schaap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the MarTech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome back to the last episode of SMB Week on the MarTech Podcast. This week, we've been turning our attention to the little guys, the up-and-comers, the builders, and the hustlers. Each day, we've been publishing an episode that discusses how small and medium-sized businesses can implement marketing strategies to grow their organizations and compete with the big boys. Joining us this week has been Palmer Houchins, who's the Vice President of Marketing at CallRail, a sponsor of the MarTech Podcast. CallRail is the leading provider of marketing software to businesses that want a single attribution platform to capture the journey from visitors to leads to customers. More than 100,000 companies and agencies use CallRail's easy-to-use marketing attribution and conversion intelligence software to optimize their lead generation and improve sales. From tracking calls to website form submission, CallRail's all-in-one platform takes the hassle out of reporting by providing a single source of truth for marketing ROI. And so far this week, Palmer and I have talked about how SMBs are different than enterprises, some of the SMB marketing tactics and strategies, how to manage a bootstrap budget. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about the analytics for small and medium-sized businesses. And today, we're going to talk about how to build and grow customer relationships when you're an SMB. Here's the last installment of SMB Week with Palmer Houchins from CallRail. Palmer, welcome to the last episode of SMB Week on the MarTech Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Excited to wrap up our conversation. Like I said in the intro, we've covered a lot of ground from what is an SMB all the way through how should you be monitoring and managing your analytics to understand what marketing efforts are driving your business forward. At the end of the day, business is about building relationships. Talk to me about how you think about the way that marketing efforts fold into building and growing customer relationships for SMBs.
I think this is an area where SMBs have traditionally really distinguished themselves from the enterprise. They're able to provide that next level of service. They can have that more one-to-one relationship. So I do think it's an area when it comes to service, relationship building, just customer engagement, that SMBs are really sitting in a good spot when we're comparing them to some of their enterprise partners. So certainly with the current digital marketing toolkit that's out there, folks can build up that one-to-one relationship very easily across a number of different channels.
I said before you yesterday that my advice for small and medium-sized businesses, and honestly businesses of all sizes, is to focus at the bottom of your funnel and think about optimizing for conversions before you think about how you get people to your front door. I probably missed a step here, which is the differentiation between a big business and a small business is you can invest more time into personalized conversations, into building a relationship. Talk to me about why that is so important and why it's a differentiator for SMBs versus enterprise.
It's a huge differentiator there for SMBs. When we're evaluating different businesses, different options, SMBs, when they succeed at sort of that customer service level, when they provide maybe that extra touch, whether it's just a nice thank you, a pleasant technician, whatever it may be, there's something there at an emotional level. You could really connect with folks there. And I think sometimes when we're just kind of another number in a big box store or just another work order for a big national chain, there isn't the room for that one-to-one connection as much. So I think the best SMBs, the ones who typically succeed, always understand that customer experience is just something that you can't really compromise on, that if you're going to compete against larger businesses who maybe have better margins and more scale, that there's something that you have that they don't. And in a lot of ways, it takes shape in that customer relationship.
I think that's one of the key marketing vehicles for growing businesses is building relationships and building some sense of advocacy. Not every brand is something that people are going to shout about from the rooftops, but if you're able to build a great customer experience with a meaningful group of your customers, they're going to make recommendations and you start building virality. At some point, your brand hits the tipping point where it starts growing on its own, and then you have to invest less paid budget into marketing. And the funny thing is I've seen companies that go from small, where they're able to really focus on their customer relationships, to medium, and then to big. And then at some point they say, hey, we really need to figure out who our key customers are and invest more time into managing those relationships. When you start thinking about building advocacy, what are some of the tactics and tools that you recommend SMBs use to not only make sure they're delivering a great customer experience, but also giving the tools to allow their customers to share that experience?
I think advocacy is a huge piece of that equation for a lot of SMBs. And rather than sort of saying it's a one size fits all, this is what you need to be doing, it starts with sort of training up and down, making sure that your employees are embodying what you want that customer experience to be. So whether that's taking shape on social, whether it's taking shape in person, whether it's taking shape with the person who answers the phone when a potential customer calls, there's so many of these different touch points, some less quantifiable than others, but they all have kind of a meaningful impact on it. And largely what it's getting at is if you can turn word of mouth into a real channel for you, the ceiling gets a lot higher for sort of where your business can go. It doesn't necessarily start in one place. It's more about what the different connection points are with your business. If you're a business that's active on social, you want to make sure that you've got someone who knows how to engage with your customers, with your followers in the right way. By the same token, if you're relying on phone calls, you want to make sure that that person who's the first touch point answering the phones is really providing a seamless customer experience up and down. So there's a number of different ways that you can measure, monitor, and help do that in a good way. But I think it just starts with building what that customer experience should be and making sure that your employees are embodying that day to day.
So I think that this is the biggest place where small and medium-sized businesses have a distinct advantage over enterprise companies is their ability to focus and cultivate relationships with their customers. If you're not dealing with them at scale, you have the ability to actually build relationships and understand your customers more. And honestly, there's just one main point of contact if you're a solopreneur. So you're the only person that's going to have the ability to get in touch with your customers. As you think about the evaluation and analytics behind word of mouth, how do you think about tracking that? How do you think about understanding whether you're headed in the right direction when it comes to building the untrackable part, about evaluating what can sometimes be the untrackable part of your marketing efforts?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, brand awareness and affinity can be really hard to measure. Word of mouth, obviously, is really tough. I think what you can do is just look at a number of different solutions to help track that across channels. There's a number of different social solutions that are fairly lightweight, can help folks understand what's being said on social. What does that mean? What does the tenor of that sound like? Beyond that, if you're relying on sort of live chat, phone call, emails, there's tools like Zendesk that do make that pretty easy and a way to monitor at a holistic level. I think even if we're just getting into that area of word of mouth, it's making sure that you're providing, let's say you have a list, that you're responding to each of those questions that come in with a timely and sort of appropriate response there. So for me, it's less about trying to measure and capture this because it is something that has eluded folks from a long time. And I'm not sure that we're necessarily in a spot where we can completely solve it, but more about making sure you're covering all your bases in the right channels and not letting anything slip through the cracks.
I have a case study for you. When I was running my content business and started reaching out to initial sponsors, one of the first emails I sent as part of a cold outreach campaign was to a company named CallRail. And they were generous enough to be one of my first sponsors for my content business. It's a podcast business. And I've focused on cultivating that relationship and trying to provide as much value and personal touch as I possibly can. When the phone rings from CallRail, I answer it. I try to have a smile on my voice, and I make sure that we over-deliver everything that we do. And it's developed into an ongoing relationship that's lasted for now what is close to a year and a half. And I've gone through multiple different points of contact within that relationship, but have been able to hopefully build some credibility and show my appreciation for the support that they've given me. Obviously, I'm talking about us and trying to bring it back home. But Palmer, let me just say I appreciate not only you being the guest for SMB Week, but also for your and CallRail's continued support of the MarTech podcast. I think that it is maybe the best example that I have of some of the ways that you can focus on building relationships is by truly meaning it. And, analytics aside and all the tools that we use to track our marketing efforts, at the end of the day, when you're a small and medium-sized businesses, building relationships with the people that you're working with is what's going to grow your business the fastest. So let me just take a second to say thank you for being my guest. Thank you for sponsoring the podcast. And I hope that you enjoyed seeing how the sausage is made.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for being such a great partner over the past year and a half.
All right. It's a love fest here on the MarTech podcast. And that wraps up this episode and SMB Week on the MarTech podcast. Thanks again to Palmer Houchins for joining us. If you're interested in contacting Palmer, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes. You can contact him on Twitter. His company's handle is CallRail, CallRail, or you can visit his company's website, which is callrail.com. Just one more link in our show notes I'd like to tell you about. If you didn't have a chance to take notes while you were listening to this podcast, head over to martechpod.com where we have summaries of all of our episodes, contact information for our guests. You can sign up for our once-a-week newsletter. You can even send us your topic suggestions or your marketing questions, which we'll answer live on our show. Of course, you could always reach out on social media. Our handle is MarTechPod, MarTechPod on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or you can contact me directly. My handle is Ben J. Shap, BenJShap. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of marketing and technology knowledge in your podcast feed, we're going to publish an episode every day this year. So hit the subscribe button in your podcast app and we'll be back in your feed tomorrow morning. All right, that's it for today. And that's it for SMB Week on the MarTech podcast. But until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.